The Dark Angels are considered amongst the most powerful and secretive of the Loyalist Space Marine chapters. They were the first legion of the original 20 Space Marine legions. They were created during the first founding of the 30th millennium. They claim complete allegiance and service to the Emperor of Mankind. Their actions and secret goals, at times, seem to be at odds with that professed loyalty. The Dark Angels were the first of the Emperor's Space Marine legions, and in the earliest incarnations, fought as the personal army of the Master of Humanity, in the dawning years of the Great Crusade, and in the shadowed campaigns that preceded it. As a prototype of what were to become the Legiones Astartes, they served both as a template for the more specialized legions that were to come after them, and a standard by which these successors would be measured. Once the most numerous and powerful of the Space Marine legions, their numbers would be depleted by decades of savage warfare, particularly in the War of the Rangdan Genocide, one of the most apocalyptic campaigns of the Great Crusade. The scars of these battles would change them, as would their reunification with their Primark, Lionel Johnson, and the introduction of fresh blood from his adopted world of Caliban, a death world dominated by warlike feudal society of techno-barbarians. Caliban's warrior orders provided fertile ground for the Legion's regeneration, and its martial codes and practices were extensively incorporated and adopted by the rebuilding Legion. Caliban was a planet of immense forests, inhabited by terrible, monstrous beasts, mutated by the touch of chaos in the centuries after the birth of the chaos god Slanesh. Due to the planet's proximity to the nearby Eye of Terror, these monsters were numerous. Johnson managed to survive in the forests alone, living as a wild man, far from civilization. Caliban was home to many knightly orders of warrior aristocrats, created to defend its people and the massive fortress monasteries they lived within, from the great beasts that lurked in the forest. These knights maintained a few aspects of Caliban's ancient technology, from before the Age of Strife, and wielded primitive bolter pistols, and wore suits of simple power armor, very similar to that later used by the Astartes, that were handed down from knight to knight. Despite these technological trappings, Caliban remained very much a pre-industrial society, whose warriors rode to war on horseback. One of the most prominent knightly organizations was known simply as the Order, and was made up of commoners and nobles alike, whereas the other knightly orders were drawn by tradition only from the Calibanite nobility. A group of the Order's knights on patrol in the forests discovered the Pharaoh Primark in the forest. When the knight seemed inclined to kill him, one man, a well-respected knight named Luther, stayed his hand and decided to take the Primark into the Order. Luther named the Pharaoh boy Lionel Johnson, which means the lion son of the forest in the Calibanite dialect of Low Gothic. L. Johnson was taken to the Order's fortress monastery and taught human ways. The lion learned to speak incredibly quickly and soon mastered all the necessary aspects of Calibanite culture, faster than anyone ever had, including Luther, his mentor, foster father, and best friend, believed possible. With Luther at his side, L. Johnson ultimately rose into the highest rank of the Order. At the height of his reputation, L. Johnson made clear his extraordinary ambition. He called for a grand crusade to exterminate the great beasts of Caliban, so that the people of his world could finally know peace and live free from the fear. This was received with great enthusiasm by the other members of the Order, and even the other knightly orders, but it proved to be a time-consuming process that took nearly a decade of constant warfare against the terrible dangers of the deep forest. The word of their success brought an influx of new recruits into the Order as the campaign progressed. Any Calibanite knightly order that did not follow Johnson's lead, such as the Knights of Lupus of the Northern Forests, which feared that the destruction of the great beasts would upend Calibanite's traditional social order, were destroyed to the last man. After the last of the great beasts fell, Johnson was named Supreme Grand Master of the Order and was recognized as the rightful ruler of all Caliban. It seemed that the world was ready to enter a new golden age of peace and prosperity that the Lion had promised. Shortly after the success of the campaign, the Emperor of Mankind and his Astartes scouts arrived on Caliban, after they detected the psychic emanation of one of the Primarchs. From the moment the Emperor landed, L. Johnson felt a deep connection between himself and the Master of Mankind, and swore his fealty, In return, the Emperor made the Lion the commander of the First Legion of Space Marines that had been created from his genome. The Emperor had first sent emissaries from the First Legion, who had been created from the genome of their lost Primark, Lionel Johnson. The Imperials brought with them all of the advanced technology that had been hailed by the people of Caliban as miraculous. Soon the Astartes of the First Legion were putting potential Astarte aspirants from the Order and the other knightly organizations through a myriad of martial trials and competitions to gauge their level of martial prowess and character. Only the strongest and most dedicated were allowed to pass the next stage. Many within the Order whispered that they were competing for a place within the rank of the Astartes, but these trials also served as a secondary purpose of determining if the human strain on Caliban was genetically pure enough to warrant its status as the world of which the First Legion would recruit from. While the Calibanite knightly orders reveled in their differences and often resorted to combat to settle their feuds, the Astarte legions were united in purpose and will. Such divisions could not be tolerated, and at the behest of Lion and the Astartes, the individual knightly orders were disbanded and brought under the control of the First Legion. Such a drastic move did not happen overnight, and could not pass without dissenting voices. But when the Lion spoke in favor of the union of knights and the glory that would be theirs for the taking in the service of the Emperor, most such voices were stilled, most, but not all. The Emperor himself finally came to Caliban on a day that would live on for centuries in Calibanite legend. His great vessel descended from the heavens, and he welcomed his lost son back into the fold. The event was slightly marred by an attempt against the Emperor's life made by certain conservative knights of the Order who feared the changes that would be brought to their world by the Imperium and its advanced science and culture. But these malcontents were swiftly and mercilessly executed as traitors by the Astartes. More objections were raised when the soldiers of the Imperial army descended to the surface of Caliban. The First Legion's aspirant trials had already identified the likely candidates of recruitment into the august body, but the vast majority of the planet's population would still be able to serve the Emperor as troops of the Imperial Navy. Within an unimaginably short period of time, the surface of Caliban was transformed from a world of sprawling wilderness and castles to one of martial industry that rang to the beat of factory hammers and the trample of booted feet as its populace marched itself into interstellar war. The Emperor's servants had descended to Caliban with enormous earth-moving machines that cleared dozens of kilometers of forest a day and left flat, lifeless soil in their wake, ready to be planted or built upon. Mines and refineries and manufactorums followed, ready to transform the planet's abundant resources into vital war materials for the Emperor's crusade. Cities were built to supply the sprawling industrial sites, growing upward and outward with each passing year as the traditional villages and towns surrounding the fortress monasteries were emptied and their citizens relocated to better serve the Imperium. Finally, the day arrived when those individuals whose courage had been proven beyond doubt, whose stamina, endurance, and strength had seen them through the Astarte trials, they were ready to be added to the ranks of the First Legion. Word had come from Luther that the Astartes had made their final selection for advanced training and the geo-enhancement required to join their ranks. Through the application of imperial science and marvels of gene seeds, these aspirants were transformed over the next several years into battle brothers of the First Legion, newly renamed the Dark Angels by the Lion after an ancient Calibanite fable. Luther had been chosen to join the First Legion by the Astartes, but in common with a large proportion of the initial intakes from the Order and the other Calibanite knightly orders, he had been too old to benefit from the implantation of gene seeds. In its place, Luther and others like him had undergone an extensive series of genetic, surgical, and biochemical enhancement procedures designed to increase their stamina, strength, and reflexes to superhuman levels. They were taller, stronger, and quicker than mortal men, but for all that they were still not true Astartes. It was difficult for Luther and the others to come to terms with this fact, knowing that they were surrounded by those who had once served under them as squires and junior knights, but were now far more powerful than they could even ever hope to become. Luther still served as the Lion's second within the Legion, earning his position based on merit, and fueled with a desire to prove himself by this devotion to the imperial ideal. But despite his success, he could not escape his own inner conviction that he was somehow being looked down upon because he was not a full Astarte. Lionel Johnson took command of the Dark Angels Legion that had been created from his genetic stock, and he was granted command of the 4th Expeditionary Fleet of the Great Crusade. One of Lionel Johnson's earliest campaigns as a commander of the newly dubbed Dark Angels Legion was the compliance of the newly discovered nightly world of Molech. This was a massive joint compliance operation between multiple legions, including the Dark Angels, Luna Wolves, Emperor's Children, White Scars, and thousands of Imperialis Auxilia soldiers, and various Mechanicum and Legal Titanicus assets. Cyprian Divine of House Divine was named planetary governor of Molech after it was conquered. In the presence of several of his Primark sons, the Emperor led them to a warp portal hidden underground, where he proceeded to utilize it to enter into the realm of chaos to parley with the ruinous powers. When he finally returned, the Emperor appeared aged, but was more powerful. He then suppressed his son's memories of Molech and stationed a large garrison force comprised of nearly 100 Imperialix Auxiliar regiments, 3 Legal Titanicus cohorts, along with a detachment from 2 Space Marine legions to protect the secrets of the warp portal on Molech. Next, the Dark Angels took part in a vital campaign known as Rangdan Genocides. They fought alongside Titans from the Legal Grynoconicus, Legal Vorcorum, and Legal Kydonus, as well as other Zenith Mechanicum forces from the Forge World of Zan II. The Dark Angels hurled themselves at their enemies and broke their great strength in countless battles against the vile Xenos on the edge of the Halo stars. This campaign culminated in the 3rd Rangdan Genocide around the 890th year of the 30th millennium, which resulted in the loss of the lives of 50,000 Dark Angel Space Marines, spent in preventing the destruction of perhaps the entire Northern Imperium by the menace from the Outer Darkness. Due to these extensive losses suffered by the First Legion, the Ultramarines legions were now becoming the largest Space Marine legion, standing at around 166,000 legionnaires. Unyielding, technologically capable, ruthless, and insular, the Dark Angels at the time of the Horus Heresy would once again be a powerful and highly independent legion, used to operate on its own to conduct large-scale campaigns and compliance actions. Because of this, the fear of the First Legion's intervention led the plot of the War Master to ensure that when his treacherous plan came to fruition, the Dark Angels had been dispatched to the outer edge of the Imperium, where they would be unable to interfere, at least for a time. As the Horus Heresy progressed, however, the power of this legion would make itself known, savaging the Night Lords at Thrama and going to unleash destruction on unprecedented scale during the later years of the Age of Darkness, when they crushed traitor worlds after traitor world across the Southern Galactic Zone. During the 200th year of the Great Crusade, 998 of the 30th millennium, the Dark Angels Legion was carrying out an Imperial compliance campaign against the shield swords of the so-called Gordian League, a confederation of human worlds who were aligned with degenerate Xenos. During the 7-year-long campaign, the Dark Angels' High Command received word that War Master Horus and his legion had renounced their oath of allegiance, along with Primark Angron's World Eaters, Mortarion's Death Guard, and Fulgrim's Emperor's Children. They also received word of the atrocity committed against the doomed world of Isfan III, when Horus ordered it to be virus-bombed, rendering it a lifeless planet. The War Master knew that the Emperor would respond with all the force he had available. Johnson believed that the Dark Angels deployed to the Shield worlds was a part of an effort to scatter the Imperium's most loyal servants as far as possible, in order to minimize the number of legions Horus would have to face at any given time. Even so, a strike force of 7 full legions
posed a dire threat to Horus's survival as they made their way toward Isfahan V. The Lion's forces were too deeply enmeshed in the Shield Worlds to respond quickly to Horus's treachery. The best estimate of the Primark staff indicated that it would take nearly 8 months to conclude their offensive operations, even on emergency basis, and reposition themselves for a strike against Isfahan V. Even if they could move quickly, Horus's agents would be able to alert the War Master in time to organize a counter-strike. However, Johnson believed that a small hand-picked force might accomplish what an entire legion could not. The Primark issued orders for many of his reserve squadrons to resupply and prepare for imminent deployment to the Tanagran system. Their primary target was to secure the Forge World of Diamad. They could not afford to let the War Master acquire the substantial supplies and ordnance needed to fortify the world of Isfahan V against the approaching Loyalist strike force. Johnson would personally lead the expedition to Diamad with a battle group of 15 warships. Secrecy was vital, as the Primark was aware that the War Master's agents were more than likely tracking the Dark Angel's movements. Johnson went to Diamad in order to secure several powerful Continental siege machines, vast artillery pieces that could devastate the most powerful fortifications. The small fleet of Dark Angel vessels arrived in the Tanagra system just 5 days before the destruction of Horus's landing force on Xanathos starport. With no way to secure the siege machines held in storage in the planet's depots from Johnson's Astartes, the admiral of the raiding fleet had little choice but to withdraw back to Isfahan. The War Master's final gambit had failed. Following this small victory, Johnson met with his fellow brother Primark Perturabo of the Iron Warriors Legion aboard his flagship Invincible Reason. Perturabo informed Johnson that his legion was en route to Isfahan system to face the War Master and his traitor legions upon the black sands of Isfahan V. Ferrus Manus and the Iron Hands Legion had hasted ahead of them, hungry to claim the Emperor's vengeance against Horus. Perturabo then lied to Johnson, explaining that he had hoped that his legion would have the provision for his vessels at the Xanthos starport, above Diamad, before continuing to the combat zone. Of course, they were now unable to, as the First Legion had destroyed the starport. Perturabo then inquired to Johnson how he had learned of the existence of the siege engines. Johnson explained that he had learned of it 50 years earlier when he was studying the history of the Great Crusade and saw a reference to them in a dispatch from Horus that he had sent to the Emperor. He'd commissioned the colossal siege machines from the Master of Diamad during the long siege of the Xenos fortress state on Thessanos. The war machine took much longer for the Forge Master to complete than planned. By the time they were finished, the campaign had been over for a year and a half, and Horus had moved on to other conquests. So the weapons were put into a depot here against the day when he would come to claim them. But then the Isfahan III atrocity occurred. When Johnson had received word of Horus's betrayal, he knew that ultimately the War Master's plan would lead to Terra. Even if he were somehow to prevail against Perturabo and the other legions sent to confront him in the Isfahan system, the War Master couldn't claim total victory so long as the Emperor was safe in his palace. No, for Horus to triumph, their father had to die, and that meant a long and constant siege of Terra. Therefore, the War Master would come to claim the siege engines on Diamad. Johnson informed his brother that he would be unable to accompany the Loyalist fleet to Diamad, as he had to make all haste to the Shield Worlds and prepare the rest of the First Legion for the trip to Terra. In fact, he thought it best if no one outside Perturabo, himself, and other Primarchs ever knew that Lion was there. He didn't want the Emperor to believe he had anything at Diamad with an ulterior motive in mind. Perturabo agreed that it was both a prudent choice and a very humble one. Johnson explained that his actions were done for the good of the Imperium, not for power. Johnson confessed to his brother that he believed Horus had become their father's favorite son for no other reason than fate. Had he been the first one he'd found, Johnson believed he would have been the War Master. The Lion believed that Horus would inevitably be defeated and the Emperor would need to choose a new War Master very quickly if the Great Crusade was to continue. He asked for Perturabo's support. The two Primarchs reached an understanding. Johnson granted permission for the Iron Warriors to take possession of the siege guns at their convenience, on one condition, of course. At that, Perturabo raised an eyebrow. Inquisitively, Johnson made his brother promise that the siege weapon would be put to good use. Of that, Perturabo assured they most certainly would be utilized in that regard. Following the victory of the Drop Site Massacre, Horus called a meeting of the Primarchs of the 8 of the Traitor Legions, minus the participation of the Alpha Legion's Primarch, Alpharius, aboard his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. 5 of the Primarchs, including 4 who had fought at Isstvan V, met in person, including Horus, Fulgrim, Angron, Mortarion, and Lorgar. 3 appeared through the use of holographic emitters that transmitted their signal through the warp, including Perturabo, Night Hunter, and Magnus the Red, who had only recently joined the Traitors after the scouring of Prospero, when the broken remains of his legion had been transported by Tzeentch into the Eye of Terror to the planet of the Sorcerers. The Thousand Sons, bitter at what they perceived as their betrayal by the Emperor, now willingly became the 9th Traitor Legion. The Council of Traitor Primarchs made their plans for the next step in their war against the Emperor, and then each legion went its way according to its assigned role. In the 7th year of the 31st millennium, the Night Haunter's fleet had departed, bound for the planet of Tasagulsa, a remote world in the eastern fringe that lay shrouded in the shadow of the great asteroid belt. From there, the Night Lord's terror troops would begin a campaign of genocide against the imperial strongholds of Heroldar and Thramus. If not taken, would lead the flanks of the War Master's strike on Terra, vulnerable to attack. This campaign would also delay the Dark Angel's Legion from reinforcing the Loyalists, and Thramus' system was of particular importance as it comprised a number of Mechanicum Forge worlds whose loyalty was still to the Emperor. This bitterly contested campaign, known as the Thramus Crusade, dragged on for nearly 3 standard years in an attempt to sway his brother, Lionel Johnson, to Horus's cause. The Night Haunter left a deep void beacon in the patrol path of one of the Dark Angel's Outrider vessels. The beacon was said to transmit coordinates in advance so that the two Primarchs could meet and parley on the planet. Night Haunter wanted to break his former brother either mentally, physically, or both to obtain his objectives. The Primarchs were accompanied by 2 warriors from their personal honor guard to the parley. The meeting began simple enough between the two as they conversed with relative civility. This lasted only until the Night Haunter slandered Johnson, and in return the Lion struck his former brother. This melee further degenerated into an all-out brawl between the two sides, as the Night Hunter strangled the life out of L. Johnson. One of the Dark Angel honor guards ran his sword through the Night Hunter's back, saving his Primarch's life. Eventually, both legions sent reinforcements in response to this incident. Each side dragged away their respective Primarchs from the scene of combat. Both Primarchs survived this brutal confrontation and went on to continue the contest between their legions for control of the Aegis subsector.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.